Welcome. Thanks for joining our 10 tips for CMOs for how to turn your PR into a profit centre. I'm here with Danielle Stead.
Hello, Carden.
Danielle's our Head of Integrated Marketing and I'm the Managing Director of Blue Chip Communication. I created this firm 15 years ago now to fill a gap that many of you I think are quite familiar with, which is to find PR people and marketers who know your business almost as well as you do. Dan and I have both worked in-house for a very long time before coming to Blue Chip. Dan joined 4.5 years ago, and certainly what I found many years before that was that I couldn't find people who knew the business as well as I did, which is one of the reasons you hired us when you were a CMO.
That's right.
And delighted to say that Dan chose to join Blue Chip a little while ago in order to help us turn PR into a lead generating and profit centre part of marketing, which was not particularly something people were thinking about when we started doing this work. But I'm pleased to say that in the time since, we've got some spectacular client outcomes, including clients who have funds under management or reduced cost of conversion because of the work that Dan and others in the Blue Chip team have done. So Dan, can you introduce a little bit of your background?
Sure. I've been with Blue Chip nearly 5 years, but having spent 30 years as a professional services marketer and predominantly in financial services during that time, and worked for inside brands to help brands be able to reach their market more effectively and to use the resources and the time available to make the most of their marketing budgets.
Right, and so very quickly we'll move on to our 10 tips. What we promised in the intro to this was that we would talk about how to use PR cost effectively to drive profit and revenue, not just perhaps profile, which is what many people think of it as doing. We also said that we would talk about integrating channels to find the right people, and we talked about how to become invaluable to your audience, which is pretty much on topic for point number 1, which is about personas. So Dan, your first point is about understanding your audience and developing personas and potentially anti-personas. Why is that particularly relevant in a sort of PR to profit centre sense?
It's rather foundational actually, and from both a PR and marketing point of view, so it wouldn't be any surprise to most people. Today the persona is the archetype of the type of audience that you want to reach, your ideal customer essentially, and when we talk about anti-personas, it's the actually opposite of that. It's the type of people you do not want attracted to your business. You want them to select out, which is equally important because resources and time and money are limited. So if we talk about the ideal persona, I'd like to give you an example of just talking demographically. So let's consider 2 real men born in 1948. Both are on their second marriages, both have 2 children, both are extraordinarily wealthy, both like skiing in the Alps in winter, and both love dogs.
Right.
Both love dogs, but that's English. And if I tell you one is Ozzy Osbourne and one is Prince Charles, then that's going to tell you quite a lot psychographically about the type of messages and what sort of problems which are going to be solving for Prince Charles as opposed to Ozzy Osbourne. That's really at the crux, I think, of any communication, PR or marketing strategy, is to deeply understand who you're talking to.
Right, okay, and then deeply understanding, and you speak to them about different topics, you find them in different places.
Yes.
And obviously, I'm thinking really ultimately that saves them money, right?
Yes, exactly.
Right, or brings them to you.
Yes, and it takes a lot of the guesswork out of what your marketing is doing because you're very clear on who you're talking to, where they are.
So there's an efficiency dividend from that.
Correct.
Cool, so tip number 2, and I am racing a bit here, is address unsolved but real problems your audience has. Can you give me an example? And I know you've got a great client example recently where you went and looked for those unsolved problems. Can you talk about how you did that and why that was taking a PR approach and turning it into a lead gen effectively too?
Yes, of course. So we had a client who wanted to understand the intermediaries in their space. We interviewed just over 6 of those individuals to really get to the psychographic drivers that they were thinking during their purchase decision mostly, and then where they were going to be researching and how they came to make those decisions. What we discovered through that work is there was a third persona that the client hadn't considered, which was somebody who was very important in the buying process, who was driven much more around efficiencies and what the software would actually deliver, for instance, rather than the actual technical area of what the client was doing for their clients, if that makes sense. So it's a whole different persona that requires different messaging and has different pain points and different needs.
So what I'm hearing you say is that by doing the persona work properly, everyone knows you should do persona work, but what I'm hearing you say is by doing it properly, you might even find a persona you didn't know existed, and then you'll use actually quite a different approach potentially.
Yes, exactly. And so then your content creation and how you go to market is hugely influenced by that.
And who you speak to through your PR and your other channels will be different.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. So then it sort of segues to point 3. God, you've written these in a way that really dovetail quite nicely. Point number 3 is understand the path to purchase and speak to people along it.
Yes.
Have you got a client example of that? And what is it that maybe CMOs aren't thinking of with regards to that right now?
I think this is where PR 101 actually becomes a little more advanced, because a lot of PR is, let's just get my message out there type of PR. We hear that brief quite often. Where we can become a little more nuanced, I think, is understanding, going back to those foundational persona work, and to think about where is my ideal persona buyer going to be at each stage of the journey. So if I suddenly have children, not suddenly, I don't suddenly have children, but if I have children, I'm now aware that I need to look after them should something happen to me. So I'm going to start looking at what do I do
right.
should something unforeseen happen, and I can financially look after my dependents. So that's very top of the funnel. Now I'm aware of a pain point. I will probably start Googling what to do about that. And then as I progress through, I'll be making decisions. Well, do I self-insure? Do I talk to an insurance provider? Do I need to go through, can I go direct? Do I need to go through an advisor? I'm going to be making a whole lot of decisions as I go through. So it's very important to map your editorial plan to where I'm at that stage.
Yeah.
Am I just wanting to be made aware of a pain that I have and a problem that I need to solve, or am I now down at the pointy end where if I'm a brand, I might be able to talk about a very disruptive, very tailored product that might particularly suit somebody like me, and therefore my editorial will reflect that.
So what I'm really hearing you say in a traditional sort of PR thinking way is that you should be mapping your personas and your pain points to parts of the funnel, even in terms of your PR execution.
That's right.
Right, okay, that makes perfect sense. And then I think your next point is mix up the format and think multimedia.
Yes.
Have you got an example of doing that, say, in a PR sense?
What we're seeing out of the research and seeing work with our clients as well is a pivot in the media to different formats. So of course the written word is still the absolute base of any PR campaign. But there were stats out of the US recently saying something along the lines of, let me see, 67% of publications will be using video in the next year. So video is obviously a power of YouTube, people consuming information in different formats is increasingly important, and the publications obviously, exactly, here we are, responding to that. So they need good talent, essentially, to be able to produce that video content, which probably means a bit of training for your key spokespeople. Some people are going to be more natural at it. Everybody can do with a bit of training to make sure that they stay on message and deliver a really compelling message. And the other pivot we're seeing is social media, and PR and social media are so hand in hand now, and a lot of our briefs are delivering on both those. Social media is a very hungry beast, and so the journalists and the publications obviously have a real challenge to be able to keep producing that. We know the newsroom is really crunched for time and people, having had a lot of layoffs across News and Fairfax over the last couple of years. So think about what can you provide that makes really good social media content for the publication. Infographics are kind of a no-brainer. That's really easy to run across social or in print. And we're also seeing clients use social media as their own publication tools. We have a client who did a video press release which marries both those points essentially, and had thousands and thousands of views across that social media post just on their own channel, and obviously it was shared a lot.
I mean, we've also seen clients actually start to create tools which you've worked to market, yes, which are not what you might think of as being conventional PR, but they are the ultimate form of utility content. And so those things lend themselves to being both integrated and being patent and owned agnostic, which are your next 2 points. So it's probably worth you talking a little bit about how those things get campaigned. If you've got multimedia content, which might be a video news release, or it might be a podcast, or it might actually be a mortgage calculator, which we've done in the past.
Yes.
How do you then campaign those in a way that's, let's call it PR, but where the line is between PR and marketing, I'm not sure anymore, if you're starting to integrate properly and go patent and own, which are your tips number 5 and 6?
Yes, and if you think about the audience, then they don't stay in one channel. They are omni-channel, which is the favourite buzzword. But I might read about the brand in the Fin Review, and then I might Google something that I'm looking for help on, and an article of theirs comes up, and I find myself on their website. So you need to have a very consistent and a very integrated approach to your communication. It's very jarring to see, even just visually, sort of one instance of a brand and then turn up somewhere else, and you're wondering if this is actually even the same company. So you want the consistency of visuals, of messages, of stories, of helpfulness being played out across all your channels, which makes integrated, makes sense from an audience point of view, but it's also an efficiency from the CMO's point of view, because I can create one hub piece of content, if you like, and slice and dice that across all my channels. And I still believe that the website is the key hubs. So in a brand sense, that is your source of truth. That should be where everything ultimately resides. But you're using the other channels as ways where the audience already naturally are to drive them back, because they're not naturally coming to your website.
So find them where they are and bring them.
That's correct, yes.
Right. And so then, I guess when you talk about PR as a profit centre, part of what I'm hearing is that if you're integrating what you're doing, you've got efficiencies.
Yes.
You're less likely to lose people along the funnel.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're moving from newspaper article to social media to on-site, then if all of that feels smooth, and if the PR or the media article is consistent with the messaging, then people are more likely to stay on the journey, is I think partly what you're saying about
Yes,
that.
and also if you're very intentional, so if I know that a white paper is going to help drive brand awareness, for instance, or make my brand look smart and have a clever voice
Mm-hmm.
in the market, then what do I want them to do at the end of that? Do I
Right.
want them then to come on site and have a look at further down the funnel blogs, perhaps, on how do I go about setting up an SMSF or whatever the thing is? And then each piece of content actually has a role to play, and I don't leave anything to guesswork. I'm pretty much guiding, because we don't want the audience to be consuming excess cognitive calories. We want to kind of guide them through that.
Yeah.
And they don't have to think, we just keep them on the
A lean
journey.
and smooth diet, well lubricated.
That's
though,
right.
Is what I'm hearing.
Yes,
Right.
yes, and useful.
Useful, right, of course.
Yes.
Which I think, there's a bit of a bias here. I feel like the PR has always had to be, because we had to earn
Yes.
attention, whereas the marketing's had to make that shift.
Yes, which brings us actually to the next point about not being too tied to paid, owned and earned.
Right.
So as marketers, and I'm very guilty, having been a marketer, thinking that my brand messages are the most
Oh, I know.
interesting.
Yeah, I know. I don't mean you personally, of
that the
course.
journalist could ever possibly want to hear.
Yeah, and we still hear that. We still hear that. Gigi's just blogged about it.
Oh,
Yeah.
correct, yes, he has. So that's where I want to stand back and have a look at this and think, is this something that I can get earned coverage on?
Mm-hmm.
Is this something that will be interesting to
Right.
my, say, journalist, ultimate
Yep.
audience? Or is this something that I do think the audience needs to know, but I really need to just accept that will be something I will either be able to put out over my own channels and perhaps promote with paid to drive the traffic to the piece.
And so what I'm hearing you articulate is something that I think we're now doing more and more with clients, which is looking at every asset they've got in terms of information, piece of content, and then thinking very carefully about how to place it and where, not only in the funnel, but also across channels. And then another layer on that is paid, earned or owned.
Yes.
Where can we best get this in a campaign flow to create big momentum?
Yes, and I think where PR has a real strength is that we've had to be storytellers. I now say we have to be storytellers, because at the end of the day, when we read something, it's part entertainment, it's part educational.
Entertainment.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Sorry. I think taking that sort of storytelling ability and being able to translate it, even if it's a piece that you've promoted, you still want people to read it. Yes, you can promote it and get it out, but they'll bounce. They'll look at it for a second if it's not that interesting. So you still need your storytelling PR mindset, even through your page.
And we see that in our own content. So we see things where we publish blogs, or we write articles, or we do videos for that matter, where our own blue chip content has got either a high bounce rate or low click-throughs, or we have these really incredibly long copy Royal Commission analysis pieces where people are reading the whole lot and then emailing us at the end, and more than happy to give us permission marketing rights because they want more of the same.
Yes.
And that to us then tells a story. The numbers tell us a story about which kind of content is filling a gap, and then we start to work out, okay, well, where does it sit in a logical funnel, and what should we sort of promote through PR or other
Yes, and one last tip I think to think about there is if it's done well organically and then has people have engaged with it and have shared it, that's a good horse to back in a paid race.
Which is what you've done with other clients, and you've then been able to bring them way more leads than they would have gotten from the initial campaign burst.
Yeah,
and you test it using the PR or test it using online.
Yes, exactly.
Right. So that probably brings us nicely to tip number 7, which is about SEO keywords and backlinks. I certainly know that for years we've been working to get backlinks from media organisations, but the way that we've done that has been pretty different with you and Nicole and the rest of the marketing team on board. So can you explain how now PR keywords and backlinks work to make PR profitable?
When somebody searches for something, and Google has obviously, the algorithm now is very smart. I don't think Google even understands exactly how it works anymore, thanks to AI. It's not so much, so when we say keywords, we're actually talking about phrases, and some of those can be quite long word. We don't need to just rank for insurance, for instance. We can start ranking for things that are longer, well, how do I look after my kids through insurance? Longer phrases like that. My domain as a market, as a brand, is probably going to rank below the likes of the Fin Review or the Australian or whatnot. So if my content is in publication, it's probably going to be found for those type of searches because the domain authority of afr.com.au is much higher.
We say to clients all the time that your front page now is Google. That's actually the permanent record.
Yes.
So Financial Review or any of the other things you think you want to be in are gone quite quickly, but Google is the one that stays.
Yes.
So optimising page 1 of Google or a relevant other search engine, but usually Google is actually the main game, right?
Yes, exactly right. And this is where sort of backlinks and potentially even guest blogging or other forms of PR beyond just media relations has a role to play here. If you can get a backlink, obviously that gives you borrowed Google juice, which helps you to raise your own domain authority, which is the ultimate aim, but that's a very long game. And to your point before, where we can get backlinks, journalists aren't really that interested in helping you boost your own Google.
Unless it's really
ranking.
good utility content,
Exactly.
in my experience. It's got to be super cool tools.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly right.
Yeah.
So when calculators first came out, that would have been super cool.
Yes, and in fact we generated a lot of product X online inquiries because we had great tools.
Yes, that's right. So you again have to think about that journalist trying to be useful to his audience, not to you.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So tip number 8 is grab attention rapidly. Use jacking, have an opinion, leverage influencers.
Yes.
We've seen a million examples of that, but federal budget is always a good one. Anything topical, a news story you can jump into is a great one because it can get your story or your content into the news cycle. So I think that one almost, I'm going to skip over if that's all right.
And you and Jackie did that great webinar already on 7.
On news jacking,
Yes,
right. Thank you,
7
David Newman Scott.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I'd encourage people to go back and have a look at that because it covers it really well.
And I think thought leadership in asset management has been a perennially good example of that done well. The odd chief economist or budget night, technical tips, all those things we actually understand, but clients are increasingly doing it around consumer topics, and that's where now the big search volumes and inbound traffic come from, I think would be the quick thing there. Dan, be available to journos and online.
Yes, so journalists are on a really tight time frame. We know that. We have to be responsive to that. So anybody embarking on a PR campaign is essentially making a commitment to being available and not always at a time that necessarily suits you. So it has to be on the journalist's time because if you're not available, they will just dial the next spokesperson and that's an opportunity missed. There's also some value in being brave here, and we see a lot of clients being timid somewhat and not having strong opinions or not necessarily going out on a limb, and that doesn't mean being crazy, but that means through messaging workshops or media training or whatever is the right format to understand where up to that line you are prepared to go. And I would encourage brands to be a little bit braver on that. That has 2 benefits. One is that you're going to be more interesting to the journalists and therefore you're going to get a little bit more coverage hopefully. And secondly, you're going to attract the people who think like you. So if I look like vanilla, I'm going to be attracting all sorts of people, and it goes back to the persona and the anti-persona. So I actually want to be a little bit polarising to be able to attract the people that are going to make the most sense to my business.
Right, okay. So have an opinion is partly point 9, but be available when the journalists want you.
Yes.
And then our last point was measure, track, evaluate and iterate.
Yes. Marketing is still a little bit of art. So there's a lot of science and there's a lot of ways we can capture data and there's a lot of ways we can understand what's working and not working. What we've done with clients is made small bets. So whether it was a fund manager where we spent $500 in Facebook to drive people to an offer, actually it was less than that, I think it was $300, and had huge success from that. So then you know that's worth scaling. If I can put $300 in and get $1.8 million out, I'll do that all day, every day.
And that's high net worth individuals who most people would have said at the time that you did that work would not be found, high net worth direct, would not be found on Facebook or through Facebook ads.
Yes.
Right.
And it came back to having a really compelling offer. It offered the audience something that they couldn't necessarily
And that was not
get.
free money, right?
No.
So when you say the compelling offer, that's about understanding who you're talking to and what their unsolved problem is, which is kind of our classic PR thing, but also then campaigning it through multiple channels and working out what was working, I think.
Yes, and we've done the persona work with them,
Right.
again, as the foundational
Yeah.
piece, so we knew exactly who we were looking for. And Facebook has lots of good targeting options, which is a whole moral debate these days, but for now it's still a tool that will do that.
Yeah, and I think that client's a great example of a client who were PR only with us, and then we worked out that the best performance of their content would actually be by integrating the work more, using more multi-channel work and using paid earned and owned, and then we were getting lead gen from that PR, that content ecosystem you just described.
Yes, that's right.
Anything else your CMOs should be aware of today in terms of how to make their PR into a profit centre?
No, I think that the pressure is on CMOs to be increasingly accountable. And that was really sort of last point, is to have your dashboard, to understand what KPIs, to understand why, and be able to have the conversation at a C-suite board level to make the case on why we want to do something, how each of these activities and these leading indicators are laddering up to deliver on the ultimate business objective.
Right. I think partly what I've heard you say today is that PR is not PR anymore. And so there's also a piece that we find all the time about educating boards, CEOs, CMOs, to be honest, still about what is PR now. And that's because it's kind of an ever-changing beast. A lot of this stuff will sound very marketing to you, but the way we're doing it is actually very PR. It's very much integrated.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that wraps us up. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Carla. It was fun. And more importantly, I hope it's really interesting to people listening. So on the screen now we're showing our email address and our website. Please send in some feedback, what you found helpful, what you would like to know more about. Also on our website we'll be uploading a cheat sheet to capture the key points here, so you didn't need to be taking furious notes. And we look forward to seeing you on the email.